My ex-in-laws called my family's sacred land a wasted opportunity, then sold it behind my back to build a luxury resort where my ancestors are buried. They smiled for the cameras as bulldozers crushed centuries of memory beneath concrete, mocking superstitious nonsense, while they toasted future profits. But I wasn't grieving. I wasn't begging. I was watching. And while they laughed at the ghosts they didn't believe in, I was awakening something they couldn't buy, sue, or silence. This is how I made their dream project rot from the inside out. They sold the land where my great-grandmother is buried and called it a prime development zone. That was the subject line of the email. Cold, corporate, unsigned. Like someone had torn out a piece of my soul and filed it under miscellaneous transactions. The lawyer didn't even bother with pleasantries. Just a single line. This is to inform you that the land parcel known as Lot 72 has been transferred. I opened the attached map with trembling hands, already knowing, already mourning. And there it was. Red lines drawn like scars over the hills, a giant arrow pointing to what was now labeled Wellness Spa Construction Zone. The name made me sick. I could still see the weathered incense bowls beside my great-grandmother's stone marker. I could still smell the earth after rain, the way the wind softened whenever I stood there in silence. That soil held every prayer my ancestors ever whispered, and now they were paving it over for jacuzzis and juice bars. They did it behind my back, of course. After the divorce, Margaret told her friends that I never really belonged to the family anyway. I suppose that sentiment extended to the land my mother bled on, the land my grandmother was born on, and the graves of women whose names no one outside my lineage could even pronounce. The Whitmores had always seen tradition as a nuisance, culture as a commodity, and silence as permission. They thought I was too quiet, too spiritual, too unwilling to move on. So they moved me out, legally, neatly, ruthlessly. They waited until I had no legal standing and swooped in with their grins and gold pens. Charles signed the papers like he was closing a stock deal. Vanessa posted selfies at the site with the caption, "Had to future paradise." And Travis, he called it the next Bali, on local TV, while a bulldozer idled in the background, waiting to dig through my family's bones. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, and I didn't forget. They laughed at the past they thought they'd buried. But I wasn't done. If they wanted to play with ghosts, I'd make sure they met them. You think that was the worst part? Losing my ancestral land? No. What they took next was my right to even mourn it. And you're going to want to hear what they did when they thought no one was watching. He was never cruel. Not directly. That was the trick. My ex-husband didn't yell or slam doors or say ugly things. He just stood quietly behind his mother, his father, his perfect siblings, while they rewrote my place in the family like I was a footnote they'd long outgrown. And when the divorce came, he signed whatever his parents told him to sign. Legal transfers, land documents, power of attorney, all with that same sun-detached smile that once made me believe he was gentle. But silence can be the sharpest betrayal. And his silence was a blade that cut clean through the last tie I had to my bloodline. The land had always been mine, passed through my mother, her mother, and hers before her. But it was in his name. A practical move, they once said, for tax purposes. I was too trusting to ask more, too in love, too foolish. So after the divorce, Margaret and Charles claimed I had no rights to it. They produced documents I never remembered signing. And just like that, what was sacred became theirs to bulldoze. They said it was fair. They said it was just business. But it felt like a quiet funeral for every ancestor whose name I carried. The day they broke ground, I tried to go. I wanted to see with my own eyes what they were doing. I made it to the edge of the site before security blocked me. I told them who I was. One man radioed in, then returned with a blank stare and a firm hand on my shoulder. "You're not on the list," he said. Then he shoved me back behind the barrier as if I were some trespasser on my own family's bones. From the road, I watched the excavator tear down the old shrine at the hill's base. the one with the weather-worn statue of the guardian deity, where my grandmother knelt every new moon, whispering the same prayer for peace. It shattered like it meant nothing. I heard Vanessa's voice from the loudspeakers, calling it an exciting milestone. They told the crowd it was just old stone. No one saw me. No one asked. No one believed that what they were building came at the cost of something eternal. I was erased with the land, dismissed as a sentimental woman clinging to ghosts. But I wasn't lost. Not yet, they took everything, but left me just enough to begin. At that point, most people would give up. But if you've made it this far with me, I promise. The part you're about to hear next is where silence turns into strategy. Are you ready? It started with a dream, not a peaceful one, not the kind you wake from with a soft sigh. No, this was the kind that clings to your skin like damp soil. In the dream, I stood alone on the hill where the shrine used to be. The wind didn't move, the trees didn't breathe, and from the shadows, my great-grandmother stepped forward. Not younger, not glowing, but tired, worn, and watching. Her face held sorrow I'd never seen in life. And then she spoke, only once. "They won't hear us," she said. "So make them see." I woke before sunrise, soaked in sweat, but calm, not scared, not lost, just ready. That morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't shout or scream or send angry emails. Instead, I opened the cedar box my grandmother left me, filled with yellowing letters, brittle paper maps, old ink sketches of boundary stones and sacred wells. It smelled of camphor and memory. I began reading, slowly, methodically, the way you trace a path back to yourself after getting lost. Buried in the margins of a hand-drawn map was a phrase I hadn't noticed before, written in my grandmother's sharp, careful script. "When they forget the spirits, the land remembers." They thought they'd won, that I'd fade into silence like some grieving widow of a forgotten cause. But I wasn't confused, I wasn't delusional, and I damn sure wasn't dead. If they thought it was just superstition, I'd make it viral. I began documenting everything. The oral stories, the customs tied to the soil, the rituals and markings carved into stone. I searched local archives. I spoke to elders. I gathered their words like kindling. And when I had enough, I reached out, not to officials, but to people who knew how to listen. Travel bloggers hungry for mystery, cultural historians obsessed with oral folklore, small-town reporters tired of press releases. I didn't accuse. I just told stories, the stories they tried to bury under concrete and glass. Let them scoff, let them laugh. They wanted to build a luxury retreat. I was building something older, deeper, something that didn't need steel to stand, only memory, and the right eyes to see it. And just when they thought I was chasing ghosts, I sent their empire trembling, with nothing but old stories and a storm of truth. Curious how? Stay with me. This is where things get deliciously poetic. The first strike wasn't loud. It didn't come with lawsuits or press conferences or shouting matches in marble-floored offices. It came in the form of a quiet envelope addressed to the State Council for Cultural Heritage, carefully padded with photographs of shattered altars, unearthed grave markers, and a signed affidavit detailing the destruction of ancestral sites. Attached was a letter. No bitterness, no accusation, just a plea for preservation, anchored in local law and spiritual precedent. I added one sentence at the bottom. Some things are too old to belong to men like them. But the real blow didn't arrive by post. It started as a whisper on the internet, the kind that twists itself into myth before anyone knows who started it. An anonymous Facebook post, titled in blood-red font, "Do you dare build over the sleeping bones?" It featured blurry images of workers slipping on dry ground, machines inexplicably short-circuiting, candles relighting themselves in the empty shrine site. I didn't need to fake the curse. I just gave it a stage. Within 48 hours, it went viral. Local TikTokers began camping near the site, recording what they called omens, a mechanical arm that sparked and burst into flames, lights that flickered without power, a strange moan caught on camera late at night. One clip showed a construction worker screaming and backing away from the ground, swearing he heard a voice whisper, "Leave us." That clip hit 2.3 million views in 3 days. I didn't add captions. I didn't need to. Back at the resort's investor office, panic was beginning to spread. Charles held an emergency meeting, slamming his fist on the table, demanding someone stop the nonsense. Maggie called it social media hysteria, but they both looked rattled. Travis canceled a podcast appearance. Vanessa went private on Instagram. They thought I'd protest. They thought I'd sue. What they never expected was folklore. A friend once asked if I wanted justice. I told her, no, I want to go biblical. And this was just the first plague. Still here? Good. Because the fall doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a whisper. And in just a moment, you'll see what happens when the world begins to whisper against them. The press conference for the grand unveiling of Evergrove Sanctuary was meant to be a spectacle. Rows of white folding chairs under a polished tent, golden banners fluttering, champagne chilled in crystal flutes. But 15 minutes before it began, the sponsors vanished. Word broke through a single line in a corporate statement that rippled across social media like a thunderclap. Due to unresolved cultural heritage violations and ongoing unexplained phenomena, we are withdrawing all financial support from the Evergrove Sanctuary project. Just like that, the heart of their $1 million dream flatlined. The cancellation triggered a chain reaction. A Heritage Protection Bureau announced an official investigation into the site's legality, accusing the developers of building without clearance on land containing potentially sacred burial grounds. Construction halted. Permits froze. And then the cameras turned to Travis Whitmore, who, as executive director of the project, was summoned to defend himself on a morning news segment. He arrived in his signature polo and flashy sneakers, all swagger and spin rehearsed, until the host turned to a final question. Mr. Whitmore, can you confirm whether or not this footage? And on screen, a slow pan over broken stones, clearly tomb markers, crushed beneath bulldozer treads, was taken from the site during your project's excavation. His smile cracked, sweat beaded at his temple. For a second, he tried to speak, but his voice snagged in his throat. Then came the clip, the viral TikTok video that had haunted comment threads for days. The distorted whisper, the shadow by the broken shrine. The title across the bottom, "Would you sleep here?" The audience watched him unravel. He blinked rapidly, eyes darting off camera, lips parting in disbelief. He didn't deny. He didn't defend. He just sat there frozen, like he'd felt something reach for him from beneath the earth. And in that silence, long, crushing, unbearable, he looked like a man standing at his own grave. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had. He went silent. You think a canceled press conference was satisfying? Oh, that was just the tremor. What comes next is the earthquake. And I made sure every camera was rolling. They expected rage. They expected lawsuits, petitions, maybe even protests. What they didn't expect, what they never could have prepared for, was a folding altar draped in white linen, set beneath the morning sky, positioned like a silent sentinel right in front of the iron gates of Thuong Nguyen Resort. Monks in saffron robes arrived without announcement. Heritage groups stood beside them, cameras rolling, journalists whispering. And in the center of it all stood me. No podium, no microphone, just a bundle of marigolds in one hand and my grandmother's prayer beads in the other. We chanted, we bowed, we lit incense to the wind. While inside, developers whispered nervously, hiding behind tinted glass, unsure whether to call security or a priest. That was only the beginning. At noon, I made it official. I announced to the press that I was gifting the entire disputed land back to the community. Not for profit, not for revenge, but for remembrance. A non-profit spiritual and cultural center would be built in place of their luxury spa. No entry fees, no souvenirs, just history, preserved in silence. And as the stunned reporters leaned in, their microphones crowding around me, I unveiled the last touch, a stone slab carved from the same broken foundation they tried to erase, planted deep into the ground beside the front gate. It bore only one line: "This ground belongs to memory, not money." The photo of it went viral in less than a day, but it was the caption I posted with it that pierced deeper than any lawsuit ever could. They tried to bury my family. They forgot we were seeds. They built a resort for their egos. I planted a monument for our ghosts, and the world came, not to swim, not to stay, but to remember. You've seen the collapse. Now let me show you what rises from the ashes. Because revenge, my friend, isn't just about what you destroy, but what you rebuild. I live quietly now, in a small wooden house nestled near the cultural sanctuary that once stood at the heart of everything they tried to erase. The walls of this home don't echo with greed or betrayal. They hum with incense smoke, morning bird song, and the gentle sound of water trickling from the spring where my great-aunt used to tell us stories. That spring still flows, and so do the stories. Every morning, I rise before the sun, as my ancestors did. I light 3 sticks of incense, place them gently into the old stone holder, and bow my head in silence. Not to ask for anything, but to say thank you. Thank you for guiding me through the storm, for reminding me who I am, for never letting me forget that heritage is not just land, it's memory wrapped in breath, soil, and bone. The children come just after breakfast. Some walk down from the village. Others are dropped off by parents who whisper grateful words I never ask for. They sit cross-legged on straw mats beneath the old Bodhi tree we revived, wide-eyed and restless, until I begin. I tell them about the spirits of the land, not to scare them, but to help them listen. I show them the faded sketches my grandmother once drew, maps of the hills before roads cut through them. I share tales passed down in whispers, about sacred rocks that moved overnight, about trees that bled sapphire like tears. And somehow, they understand. There's a little girl, Emma, who reminds me of myself when I was her age. She's always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She has this habit of clutching my hand whenever I speak about the night the earth shook, not from an earthquake, but from the grief of being forgotten. She says she can still hear the drums sometimes, just before the rain comes. I believe her. In the afternoons, I tend to the garden, not because I need the vegetables, though the herbs do make a fine broth, but because I want to coax life from the same soil they tried to poison with profit. Every sprout is a defiance. Every bloom is a prayer. I've planted jasmine near the front steps, not for beauty, but for my mother. She loved their scent. Said it smelled like quiet joy. I've made peace with silence now. It doesn't haunt me the way it used to. Some evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, oolong, steeped slow, and just watch the wind play through the leaves. Sometimes my niece visits from the city. She brings books, new questions, and a laugh that reminds me the future is still soft, still possible. We don't talk much about the past anymore. She knows, I know, and that's enough. The villagers often pass by the center now, not to gawk, but to linger, to remember. Elders have started bringing their own stories, adding to the wall of memory we've built from reclaimed wood and patience. Some nights, we gather around a small fire and take turns speaking. No microphones, no cameras, just voice and smoke. A woman once told me that the reason stories survive is because truth refuses to die. I think she was right. The sanctuary is free, always will be. I didn't rebuild it to charge admission. I rebuilt it so no one would forget that sacred things cannot be sold. That roots, once severed, bleed. That the land remembers, even when people don't. And yet, I'm not bitter. Not anymore. What they tried to destroy gave birth to something they could never touch. Belonging. I belong here more now than I ever did when I wore their last name or sat at their dinner tables in silence. I belong because I chose to stay, not out of anger, but out of love. They took everything they could from me, or so they thought, But they never understood the difference between possession and presence. They possessed the deed. I carried the legacy. I've written down everything now. Not just the legal documents and records, but the legends, the meanings, the songs my grandmother sang while braiding my hair. I keep them in a hand-bound journal beside the altar. One day, when I'm gone, someone will find it. Maybe Emma, maybe another child who never knew me. And they'll know that we didn't vanish, that we didn't surrender, that we were always here, watching, waiting, remembering. I wasn't just rebuilding a place. I was restoring a voice they tried to silence beneath bulldozers and spreadsheets. A voice that now sings in every gust of wind through the Bodhi leaves, in every footstep of a child learning the truth, in every cup of tea steeped in reverence instead of regret. So if you're still listening, thank you. If this story stirred something in you, I invite you to sit with it for a while. To remember where you come from. To protect it. Not because it's valuable, but because it's sacred. And as for me, I'll be here, on this porch, with jasmine blooming at my feet and stories blooming in the mouths of children, alive, at peace, unshaken. So you think justice was served? Not quite. The most poetic part is what happens after the dust settles, when the powerful have to live with what they've done. You won't want to miss this. I didn't have to say a word. I didn't need to show up at their front doors or scream at the gates of their crumbling empire, because sometimes the most devastating sound in the world is silence. And that silence began to settle inside the Whitmore house like dust on an unused altar. I heard about Charles first. The stroke came on a rainy Thursday morning, right after another investor backed out and the city council opened a formal investigation into the illegal permits. He collapsed over his kitchen table, clutching a mug of half-finished coffee and a tablet still flashing red numbers. They said the pressure finally got to him, but I knew it wasn't just pressure. It was shame. A slow, choking guilt that he tried to suppress with bank statements and scotch. Margaret stopped going out. For a woman who once wore pearls to the farmer's market, that silence said more than words ever could. Her weekly luncheons dried up. The phone stopped ringing. Even the local women's charity distanced themselves when the truth came out. About the graves, the artifacts, the desecration. She tried to host a wellness brunch once. No one came, not even her closest friend of 20 years. That's what happens when you call ancestral bones a zoning opportunity. Travis lost his position 2 weeks later, fired by email. The board didn't even have the courtesy to call him. His startup shares? Worthless. His flashy sneakers? Worn thin from pacing the halls of a house that felt too big for someone with nothing left to prove. I saw a picture someone posted, him sitting outside the burned-out shell of a marketing office, eyes hollow, holding his head like it might roll off. The caption read, CEO of Nowhere. Vanessa tried to salvage what she could. She posted pictures from Bali with old captions, pretending she was still there, sipping cocktails, living the dream. But the internet isn't stupid. The timestamps betrayed her. People noticed the recycled outfits, the same backdrop she'd used a year before. She stopped posting after someone commented, "Even ghosts look better lit than you." And just like that, she vanished. From feeds, from memory, from relevance. They tried to come back. I know that. I saw them. Once. It was late. The moon was thin. I had just finished tending the last of the incense in the sanctuary when I caught sight of headlights stalling at the edge of the path. Charles, or what was left of him, sat in the passenger seat. Margaret, dressed in a thick coat despite the heat, stepped out. She looked older. Not in the way time ages us, but in the way regret does, fast, unforgiving, from the inside out. She walked the border of the land like she didn't know where to begin, as if she hoped some part of it still belonged to her. But the villagers were watching, always watching. One of the elders approached. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply said, "Not here." And Margaret turned away. No argument, no drama, just silence. They drove off into the dark without a word. I never pressed charges. There was nothing left to charge them with. They had no grounds to sue me, no credibility left to stand on. Their power had always been built on appearances, connections, prestige, control. And once those cracked, there was no substance underneath to hold them up. It wasn't justice that silenced them. It was truth. Plain, old, unglamorous truth. Sometimes, people ask me if I feel satisfied, if watching them unravel brought me peace. And the answer is, not in the way they expect. I didn't dance when their company folded. I didn't celebrate when Charles was wheeled into a clinic no one visited. I didn't laugh when Vanessa's face disappeared from all the glossy magazines she used to brag about. No, what I felt was release. A loosening, like unclenching a fist I didn't realize I'd been making for years. They didn't lose to me. They lost to their greed. Their downfall wasn't because of a curse or a clever scheme. It was because they believed they could profit off the bones of people they never bothered to understand. They thought legacy was paperwork, that ownership could overwrite belonging. But the land, it remembers. And so do the people. Now, when I walk through the village or sit beneath the Bodhi tree, I sometimes hear whispers about them. Not cruel, just curious. Faint echoes of a warning. Don't be like the Whitmores. And that, I think, is punishment enough. To become a story told in hushed tones, not for admiration, but for caution. To be remembered not for wealth, but for failure. Not for what you built, but for what you tried to destroy. And as for me, I continue. I light the incense, I teach the children, I plant more jasmine, and I live. Not louder, not brighter, just truer. Now, before we close this story, let me show you where true power lies. Not in revenge, not in riches, but in legacy. And the ending? It might just be the most powerful moment of all. The embroidery needle moved gently between my fingers, rhythm rising and falling like breath. I sat on the porch of the wooden house, our house, watching late sunlight drape itself across the garden. The scent of jasmine tea curled in the air. Beside me, my niece sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her small voice reading aloud from an old storybook filled with folk tales and whispers of forgotten gods. Her voice wavered when she reached the part about the guardian spirit, the one that lived in the roots of the old Bodhi tree and protected those who remembered their names. I didn't interrupt, I just listened. Not to the words alone, but to something deeper. Something I thought I had lost when bulldozers tore into the land where my grandmother once sang lullabies to the wind. I thought I had lost all of it, my lineage, my voice, my place. But here, in this moment, I realized I hadn't lost a thing. I had simply been asked to fight for it. The tree she read about was no longer just a story. It stood just beyond the porch now, taller than the roofline, with leaves that shimmered like coins when the breeze swept through. The villagers had helped me replant it after the court returned the land to its rightful form, not through a lawsuit, but through exhaustion, shame, and retreat. What they destroyed, we rebuilt. What they silenced, we sang louder. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no camera crews, just hands, calloused, wrinkled, young, eager, planting seeds, raising stones, restoring what greed tried to erase. The cultural center we built wasn't grand, but every wall whispered stories. Tourists didn't come for photos. They came for meaning. And when they left, they carried something sacred with them, something the Whitmores could never profit from. I had no need to see their faces again. But word traveled. Charles had suffered a stroke, they said. His voice slurred, his right side paralyzed. Maggie no longer hosted charity luncheons. She wandered between mirrors in a half-lit mansion, unsure what legacy meant when no one called. Vanessa moved to Arizona, remarried a realtor, and changed her last name. Travis tried launching another startup. It failed. They never reached out. They couldn't. The silence between us had become a wall higher than any courtroom could build, and I didn't need to knock. Instead, I built something they could never touch. Behind the house, a classroom under the open sky had become my favorite corner of the world. Every Tuesday and Thursday, children from the village, barefoot, curious, sometimes shy, gathered around. I taught them not from textbooks, but from memory, the way my grandmother used to. I told them about the river spirits, about the legend of the stone bowl that never emptied, about the boy who carved poetry into bamboo to save his family from famine. Their eyes widened, not because the stories were grand, but because they were ours. Once, a girl named Emma asked me, "Auntie, why do we tell stories about the past?" I answered without thinking, "So we can decide what kind of future deserves to grow from it." At night, when the stars came out, clean and undisturbed by resort lights that never were, I would light incense beneath the altar, the way my ancestors taught me. No ceremony, just a whisper, a thank you, a presence. Sometimes I would write letters to no one, pages folded and tucked beneath the floorboards, recipes, prayers, instructions for how to brew the kind of tea that made people remember home. One day, maybe my niece would find them. Maybe she'd read them aloud. Maybe she'd understand why I chose not to punish my enemies, but to outlive them with grace. I never sought applause. Justice doesn't need applause. But one afternoon, a woman from the Historical Preservation Society knocked on my door. She handed me a certificate and said my name would be recorded in the National Archives as a cultural steward. I didn't cry. I smiled, brewed her tea, and offered her a slice of sweet rice cake. That's what my mother would have done. That's what I do now. I also started a fund, not named after me, but after the land itself. Qui Bode, the Bodhi Foundation. Its purpose was simple: to protect other sacred spaces from becoming spreadsheets. We raised more than I expected. People from cities sent donations. Elder monks offered blessings. Teenagers volunteered to help digitize folktales. I sat at the edge of it all like a gardener, watching new things bloom. And when I drafted my will, I didn't divide up assets. I divided up responsibilities. One child would care for the altar, another would keep the stories alive. Another would tend the land, not as an owner, but as a listener. I left a note at the end. Forgiveness doesn't mean inheritance. Love must be earned again, in every generation. As I poured the last of the tea into my cup that evening, I glanced at the Bodhi tree again. Its branches had stretched further than I remembered, casting shade over the bench where my niece now sat, her voice quiet, her thumb marking the next page of the story. She looked up, smiled, and asked, "Do you want me to keep going?" I nodded. "They tried to erase me from history," I whispered, mostly to myself. "Now I live in every story." And in that moment, I finally felt what I had been chasing all along. Not vengeance, not victory, but peace. A peace that didn't erase the pain, but rewrote its purpose. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you felt. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories waiting to be told, just like this one.